I'm Erin Popelka. I founded Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. And I am so delighted to be here today with author Katrin Schumann. Welcome.
Hi.
So a little bit about Katrin. She was born in Germany and was raised in Brooklyn and London. Her work has been featured on the Today Show and also in Women's Day, the London Times, and NPR. Her first novel is this beautiful book I have right here called The Forgotten Hours. So congratulations on your beautiful book.
Yes, thank you. Today's the book birthday, so it's really
Today,
exciting.
I'm so delighted to get to celebrate with you today. Let's flash that cover again. This book is born today, must readers.
Well, and I'm honored. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, truly my pleasure. So tell me about The Forgotten Hours.
Well, The Forgotten Hours is a book that it's kind of about a tricky topic, which happens to be a topic that we're talking about now on a national and international level, which is that it's about a young woman who is sort of trying to remake her life in New York City. And at that moment, her father is getting out of prison. She starts to get calls from reporters asking about his crime. And the story's told in two timelines. The past timeline is 10 years earlier, when she and her super tight best friend Lulu were spending the summers by a lake, a lakeside cabin, and Lulu accuses her father of sexual assault, and he is convicted and he's put in prison. So the story really explores this idea of love and loyalty and where we draw the line in terms of loyalty. And it looks really closely at the question of, what does truth mean? You know, is there one truth? Is there really ever one single truth, or do we all see things just through our own very limited perspective? And I play with memory too, because she's trying to figure out what really happened, and she's trying to remember what happened that night.
So interesting, and so many different levels happening there too, especially because certainly from the daughter's perspective, you know, she has loyalty both to her friend and to her father. And so depending
Yeah,
on what she wants to see, what she allows herself to see, informing the telling
right.
of the story as well.
Yes, I wanted to explore that because, I'm sure a lot of our listeners will have had the experience of having a really close childhood friend, especially like between women. Like if you have a really close female friend, it's almost like a love relationship, but there's without the sexual aspect, and there's this bond, right? This loyalty between friends and this code of behavior. And so when they're young, when they're 15, and they're going through this experience in what seems otherwise like a perfectly idyllic summer night, and things really kind of go wrong, she has to pick sides. She has to decide, who does she believe? Her friend who she loves like a sister, or her father, who of course has been good to her, has only ever shown her generosity and kindness. So she sees him one way, and she sees her friend one way, and she's totally torn between the two.
Hmm. Such a hard question, and such a great fiction is such an interesting way to explore some of those hard questions, because you don't necessarily have to have the answer. You can just sort of explore the process and the characters and how they're seeing it through the novel.
Yeah, that is something that I wanted to get readers comfortable with, this idea that there's not always a simple answer to things, especially complex situations. And it's easier for us if we can see right and wrong, and if there's black and white and like good and bad. But we all know from our own experience that that's not really how the world operates. The world is very complicated, and certain circumstances, especially in these sort of he said, she said situations, there's a lot at play, and it's really, really difficult to figure out often what the truth is. And honestly, sometimes the truth isn't so simple, and it's not just one straightforward narrative. So yeah, I was playing with all that in my story.
Oh, fantastic. So many good questions. And certainly your book is incredibly timely. Advanced reviews have called it ripped from the headlines, especially alongside the Me Too movement. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that you have been working on this book for years, as it takes a while to write a novel, as it turns
Yes, it
out.
does.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the process of your idea and where the idea came from, and how that has worked alongside everything that's happened in the news and with the Me Too movement.
Sure, yeah. So the idea was really born out of the experience that I had. I'm an extremely loyal person. I just always, from childhood onwards, I've been deeply loyal to my friends and my family, and almost loyal to a fault. And as I became an adult, I started to see in myself that this trait wasn't always positive in my life, that sometimes I would be steadfast and loyal to somebody who didn't necessarily deserve that loyalty. And then I had a difficult situation a few years ago where I had two friends of mine who both became involved in these separate cases. They didn't know each other, but separate accusations of a sexual assault. And on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. I mean, it was really uncanny. And I was there with a front row seat for both of them, feeling very torn in each case, really kind of able to understand how complex these situations were, and not being a victim myself, but watching it all unfold. And I came to the realization that, anybody who's accused of a crime, or anybody who's the victim of a crime, has loved ones, whether it's family or friends or lovers or coworkers, who are kind of like, almost like peripheral victims. They're there alongside the ones who are really truly in the trenches, but they suffer too. And I just wanted to explore all that in this novel.
Absolutely. What interesting questions. And it resonates for me personally. My husband is a nurse. And so when you talk about
Mm,
secondary trauma, like I feel like sometimes I get it even third hand where, he works in
yeah,
a hospital setting and often sees patients and families on the worst days of their life. But for him, it's
yeah,
just another day at work, right? And so trying to feel both of those things and be present for that patient, present for that family,
right. Yeah,
but
I
also
can
know that you're going
imagine.
to have to come back tomorrow, right? So feeling like allowing yourself to feel some of that secondary trauma, because certainly you're exposed to it, but and feeling empathy for the people in it, but
Yeah,
but also
yeah.
being able to live your life. So it's a very tricky balance. Yeah, absolutely, great questions.
It is. And I also wanted to explore, like, how do people who aren't really the victim, the victim of the crime, how do they survive something like this? Because it is traumatic, and they do have to rebuild up their sense of trust in people, and also trust in themselves. Because in my book, The Forgotten Hours, the main character, Katie, she stops trusting her instincts because everything that she thought she knew was true turns out to be thrown into question. And so I wanted to catch her at this moment in her life where she's building her sense of who she is and who she wants to be as an adult, and the kind of life that she wants to lead. And I wanted to ask that question: how do we not only survive these experiences, but how do we come out at the other end even stronger?
Absolutely, which is such essential questions. There's so much talk about, PTSD, but there's
Yeah,
also a thing called post-traumatic growth, where we can take that trauma
right,
and use it to be stronger, to grow into a
right.
stronger person.
To
And
change the narrative about ourselves, right? I
yes,
thought that was
yes.
very interesting.
Yes. Oh, so good. And and we're kind of getting into this already, but there's so many big important questions and big important themes. What conversations are you hoping that the Forgotten Hours will spark for readers?
So I would really like for readers to basically to understand that understand a little bit more the nuances and the complexities around issues like this. I feel very strongly, I'm not taking sides in I'm not saying certain people are evil and others are completely good. I'm trying to show that we are complicated human beings. So if a reader can begin to understand that a little bit, the nuances, that I would love for that, first of all. So not to jump to conclusions and to sort of play into stereotypes. And when we hear things in the news, for example, assume them to be true. I would like readers to understand that, every little tidbit of information that we get is only scratching the surface, that the real truth is often kind of hard to find. And then the other thing is, I want it to be kind of essentially a message of hope that, we can rebuild and we can find the strength within ourselves to have the life that we want to have. as long as we don't fall into the trap of being in this culture of silence where we can't talk about the things that we're really struggling with. And that's what I'm exploring with Katie's relationship with her mother, for example, and her grandfather, where they don't really talk about the difficult things. You know, they're like, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get on with life. And while that's positive in some ways, I feel like that culture of silence can be really negative. So I'd like readers to come away after they've read this book and think, yeah, I want to talk with the people I love and my friends and the people in my life about the difficult things, because that's the only way to really get through them.
Sure, sure. And to heal along the way and to be stronger because of it, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I hope, yes, must readers, please do read The Forgotten Hours and have those great conversations. So I'd love to actually take a minute and go way back to your childhood. You had an international childhood,
Oh,
born in Germany,
yeah.
raised in Brooklyn and in London. So tell me a little bit more about how that international upbringing finds its way into your writing.
Yeah, I think it actually had a pretty big impact on me and who I became, like my personality, in that when we moved to Brooklyn, I was kind of an outsider. You know, I had parents who were German and we spoke German at home, and I didn't quite fit in. And then at age 11, I moved to England. And while I loved England and I thrived there and I stayed through high school and college, I was always an outsider and I was never really fully accepted by the English. And so I think that turned me into somebody who's just very observant. I really watch people and how they behave, and I'm really fascinated by what makes people make certain choices. And I notice details, and you know, I used to lose myself in stories and reading. That was kind of my safe haven. So I think the moving around and feeling a little bit like an outsider really did impact that part of my observational skills and my desire to write.
Sure. And observation is such a key part of a really great book, right? Like those details that kind of ground you both in the perspective of the character, but also in the world that they're in. Like I feel like those oftentimes are just the gems that make a novel worth reading, is just seeing those little details and observing those details. So sounds like you got an early start practicing that.
Yes,
Fantastic.
I did.
Yes. So you also have a book coming out next year in 2020. No pressure, but any sneak preview information you can share with us?
Yeah, so I don't know yet what the title is going to be, but the book is about it's got a similar theme in that it's also about a woman who is trying to come to terms with decisions that she's made when circumstances go awry, circumstances that are outside her control, like forces act upon her, and she's forced to make these decisions. But it's different in that it's set in post-war East Germany. So I became very interested in looking at this idea of how the German people, just the ordinary German people who were not political and who didn't fight in the war, but who were emerging into adulthood after the war, how did they not only survive, but like rebuild their sense of self and their sense of hope about their homeland. And it's set on an island in northern Germany that was behind the Iron Curtain. And so that's a key theme in the book is you know how we're sometimes led astray by the best intentions. Communism, you know, it was a way of redeeming themselves after the war, after fascism, and then it went horribly wrong. So I look at this young woman who is caught in those circumstances and ends up having to make a choice of whether to leave her homeland and leave her daughter behind in order to protect her daughter, or emigrate to the United States. And the question is, does she ever get her daughter back?
That's a
Hmm.
big question and a really dynamic
Yeah.
time. Oh my word, there will be definitely lots of conversations after that one too, for sure.
Yeah, that one is different because it has this political backdrop that I'm kind of interested in. It's not at the forefront of the book at all. It's really just sort of the background of the book, but it informs the characters and the choices that they make. And my main character, she marries not out of love, but she marries sort of out of necessity, and her husband becomes a member of the secret police. So there are aspects of the life that we're leading which which for us, you and me and this character, seems like ordinary everyday life, but that can really lead us down paths that are unexpected. And then we have to figure out, can we dig ourselves out of that hole? And that's kind of the
Sure.
idea.
Sure. Oh, fantastic. Well, that's very, very exciting. So coming out in 2020, keep your
Yes.
eyes peeled. But in the meantime, we have some great reading to get us there. This beautiful book, The Forgotten Hours. So today it is born. So how are you celebrating? As our last question of the interview, tell me how you're celebrating your book's birthday.
Well, I'm so happy to be celebrating with my friends and my community and my family in Boston. I have a really fantastic writing community here, which largely revolves around a place called Grub Street, which is a writing center where I've done a lot of teaching. And so I have tons of writer friends who are there, who are going to be joining me and raising a glass and celebrating this achievement. So I'm psyched.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I am so glad that you're getting a celebration, that The Forgotten Hours is getting celebration. And I'm so grateful to get to be a part of your celebrations as well. So thank you. So must readers, The Forgotten Hours by Katrin Schumann. Please do check it out. And thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Erin. Happy reading.